Unit 4, after the flood, Noah's family populates the earth. So what happens now? The earth has been flooded. God saves Noah and his family and the animals in the ark. And now they open up the ark and they leave. So what happens after that? Well, they begin to establish their new life here. So first thing that happens is we see that Noah builds an altar to the Lord. That's in chapter 8, verse 20. And then God makes another commandment, his second commandment, which is to Noah. And the commandment is to never destroy man again with a flood. We see that God blesses Noah's family, and then he commands them to multiply, not to murder. We see that as we start chapter 9. And then he repeats the covenant and confirms it with a rainbow. So in biblical speech, the rainbow is, every time we see a rainbow, we should be thankful that it's God's reminder of his covenant, that he will not ever flood the earth again, regardless of how wicked it becomes. So now we get to the middle of chapter 9, which is verse 18. And it says here now that the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then it mentions that it says, and Ham was the father of Canaan, which is going to be important later. Verse second part, it says that these three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. So it makes the point that these three guys were now the originators of all of the people groups on the earth at this time. So unfortunately, this is where the problems begin, right? So because we get to see sin's effect on the family of Noah. See, Noah was not perfect. They were not sinless, but they just, whatever they were not a part of with the generations that were going on, the stuff that was going on before the flood, doesn't mean that they were not sinful. In fact, we see, sadly, that this strange episode with Noah in chapter 9 where it says that he became a farmer, right? And he plants a vineyard, but then he gets drunk and naked and he does something. It's kind of weird, but he brings shame to his family. Ham, his son, he sees his dad and he tells his brothers, and they try and cover him up and preserve his dignity. Noah wakes up right out of a drunken stupor, curses Ham, but then he blesses Shem and Japheth. Now, this is a really interesting passage we don't have time to go into, but that's the last real thing that's recorded about Noah until, a couple hundred years later when he dies. So it's crazy that though Noah was a righteous man, he was not perfect. He could make mistakes, and the Bible definitely records that. But I think the purpose of here is to really get us into Genesis 10. And so now in Genesis 10, what we look at are what happens, how the people groups start to grow. And so we see the genealogy of his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so if you forgive the silly bathroom icons, I just wanted to use them to represent man. Let's look at these real quick. So the line of Japheth, right? The Bible says that these were his sons, and so and these were his grandkids. So Gomer had these grandkids to Japheth, and then his son Javan had these ones. Okay, so this is just kind of a quick flyover of what happens with the genealogies that we read in Genesis 10. So that's Japheth. The line of Ham is kind of interesting because these were the sons of Ham, the direct sons, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. And it tells us that Cush, this is the line that came from his son Cush. This is the line that came from his son Mizraim. Now, the last one's interesting, Casluim, because it says that this is actually the original descendant of the Philistines, who are going to play a huge role as we go further along coming up. This guy Put is interesting because he's not mentioned at all. But Canaan is hugely mentioned because it says from him came, quote, all the families of the Canaanites, which are going to come into play as we go on in this module. However, there's a really important person that came from the line of Cush that is not mentioned. In fact, he's mentioned separate, and that is Nimrod. So we'll get back to Nimrod in a second, but he comes directly from Cush, who came from the line of Ham. Now Shem, the last son of Noah, right? These were his three sons here, or these were his five sons. Now these three over here on the left, Elam, Asher, and Lud, they were all bachelors, right? But Aram had a line, and then Arphaxad, I don't know, that guy, he also had a line too, and it went from Selah to Eber to Peleg and to Joktan. Now, this is where you probably are checking out. But don't. This is kind of interesting, right? Actually, this is just kind of funny. This guy Joktan is interesting because Joktan, well, he was a busy guy. He had a lot of kids, and what's funny is that even the Bible kind of almost jokes at it. I think this is my new favorite verse from Genesis 10, right? It says, all these were the sons of Joktan. But he came down from this guy, Arphaxad, right? And so you're like, oh my gosh, I'm dying with genealogies. Hang with me, okay? Because when we talk about Nimrod, what's important to know about Nimrod is he was like the first hunter. He was the first kind of hunter or conqueror that we read about. Because in verse 9, it says he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. So it's kind of a quote about him that was going around at that time. And it mentions his kingdoms. It talks about how Nimrod had kind of conquered 3 areas, right? Shinar, Assyria, and then between Nineveh and Clash. And you see, these are ancient areas, but there's 2 names that should stick out if you've read the Bible, and those are Babel and Nineveh. And so when we get to the Tower of Babel a little bit later, Nimrod is a key player for that event. And Nineveh obviously comes along in the story of Jonah when we get there later. So, but then the Bible, if we go back to Genesis 10, we notice something kind of weird and interesting. Well, these are the sons of Shem right here, and this is what I showed you with this interesting guy going up to Joktan, right? Well, in Genesis 11, it covers the Tower of Babel, and then it jumps back to the line of Shem, but it does it in a different way, because in Genesis 11, it actually goes down to this guy, Peleg, and then it doesn't mention Joktan and his massive amount of sons. It talks about this guy, Ru, and then it goes the line of Ru, and it walks you down, but it has a very clear purpose in mind. It's trying to get to someone important. So here, it goes from Ru all the way down to Nahor, and Nahor is of course, the father of Terah, and Terah is, of course, the father of 3 important people, one specifically, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So Abram, as we know, is going to become a key figure in the Bible that we're going to study going forward. In fact, what we're going to do next in Unit 5 is we're going to actually now look at the family of Abram, the same person who, of course, becomes Abraham, but his name is Abram right now. It's the family of Abram and how God chooses a single family line.